Alright, today let's make some rice. This is one of those recipes that's really helpful if you're strapped for cash. I got this entire bag of rice for about $4, and that's in DC where things tend to be a little bit more expensive. The type of rice I'm going to be using today is jasmine. It's actually just a very nice tasting white rice. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need to do is actually measure out how much rice we're going to be using. For this, I'm going to be using a measuring cup, but honestly, if you don't have a measuring cup, as long as you have some cup that's consistent, you just need to make sure you got the ratio down. And I'll explain what that means in a second. All right, so once we have our rice measured out, what we need to do is we actually need to wash our rice. Now, if you're doing this in your sink, the easy way to do that is to pour the rice into a sieve and then just kind of rinse the rice under the sieve. However, to be able to film this for you guys, I have a bowl and I'm bringing the water to the rice, which is kind of the opposite way that you might do this if you're at home. When you first put the water into the rice, you should notice that the water becomes immediately cloudy. That's essentially the starch, what we want to actually wash off. As the rice is being transported around, it's kind of rubbing against itself and basically just rubbing off little tiny pieces of rice. And that's what that stuff is, and we don't really want that. It'll end up giving us a very sticky, mushy rice. In total, this whole thing should take about 30 seconds to a minute to do. It drastically improves the texture of your rice. So after about 3 times of washing it, you should notice that the water should become relatively clear, and that's a good indication that we're ready to move on to the next step, which is to heat up our water. And for that, we want to use a ratio of 1.5 cups of water to 1 cup of rice. So basically just use whatever you use to measure off the rice and fill that with water, dump that in, and then just do half of that one more time. So you have 1.5 times the water that you had for rice. Bring this up to a boil and add a little bit of salt. Now this is actually a very crucial step because if you don't add any salt, your rice is going to taste pretty bad. Alright, we're just going to keep heating the water until it starts boiling, and then we're ready to add our rice. Very carefully add the rice into the boiling water, and I actually like to turn the heat off at this stage. What we want is actually something known as a simmer, which is just basically a very, very light boil, not like that really bubbly boil that we just saw a second ago. Once all your rice is in the pot, go ahead and cover it up. I turn it back on, and usually I put it to a low or medium heat. And we want to heat this rice and water until we just barely see some bubbles. We want it to be a very gentle mixture. Now, the mistake I made here was that my pot is way too small for the amount of rice that I'm boiling. So you can do it like this, but as you can see, it's getting a little close. Now, as you can see, the rice is boiling a little bit too aggressively, and if that happens to you, just quickly take the lid off for a second to let it cool down a little bit. With this electric burner, there wasn't many options to be able to have a very low heat, but essentially we want it to boil at basically this level, and we're gonna let it cook for about 10 minutes total. If your pot lid has a small hole for venting, that's great. If not, you might need to tilt your lid just to allow a little bit of the steam to vent out of the pot, like I'm doing here. Once it's kind of simmering like this, set a timer for 14 minutes and let it go. The beauty of rice is once you get it started, you really don't have to fiddle with it too much. I come back to it about 14 minutes later, and it's not a bad idea to take the lid off with a wooden spoon so you don't get a steam burn. Make sure the heat is off, and what we should notice is the rice is kind of cooked and also settled in like kind of a bed. Now the next step of what we want to do is what's known as fluffing. Now if you do this right, you can definitely do this in the pot, but since I made the mistake of using a container that was way too small, I actually transferred this to a bowl to fluff. Now as I said before, what we want to do is fluff the rice, and that means that we don't want to stir it like we might stir a soup. Instead, we want to use something like a spatula to just lift the rice up and allow it to kind of break on its own. This will separate the grains and give us a rice that has a really nice texture. But also we're releasing steam and helping drive out extra moisture, which is going to leave us with a rice that has a little bit of a better texture. After you fluff the rice, let it sit for about 2 to 3 more minutes just to kind of let any excess steam off and finish its cooking process, and then that's basically it. A rice like this is just begging for some nice curry. Adding a few pieces of tofu and some sriracha sauce makes a really good and cheap dinner. But it's also not a bad idea to do a taste test. Okay, so I have my rice here, and basically it's just been sitting for 5 minutes, and I'm just gonna taste it because, you know, that way you know that it's real. That's delicious. All right, well, that's it for this video. And some of you may be wondering, why am I doing such a simple video? If I actually look at my YouTube videos and which ones are actually successful, obviously a lot of the videos on soda and Red Bull and that kind of stuff have done really well. But one of the things I've noticed is that videos like how to cook a sausage, which I made many, many years ago, is still viewed quite often. And I think that it's, especially in these times when things are getting kind of expensive, I just want to have some recipes that are actually just basics, how to cook stuff. I've been there. If you're going through a situation right now where things are tight on money, I know that sucks, but recipes like this help me get through kind of harder times in my life, and I'm hoping maybe it can help you as well. All right, well that's it for this week, and I'll have some more videos on some cool stuff soon. All right, that's it for this week. Bye.